User testing is a crucial phase in the mobile app development lifecycle where real users interact with the app to identify usability issues and gather feedback. And it involves assessing the app's functionality, design, and overall user experience. So, in this lecture, we're going to discuss the significance of user testing with medium fidelity prototypes. Now, when making an app, testing it with real people is going to be very important. This is when we ask folks to try our app and tell us what they think. It helps us make sure that the app does what it's supposed to do and is easy for people to use. Now, it involves gathering feedback from real users who interact with the app, allowing developers to identify and address usability issues, uncover design flaws, and refine the overall user experience. Now, one essential component of user testing is going to be the use of prototypes, which are interactive presentations of the app's interface and functionality. Now, these prototypes come in various fidelity levels, ranging from low fidelity, which would be like like very simple sketches or wireframes, to high fidelity, which are like more detailed and visually polished designs. Now, in the context of user testing, medium fidelity prototypes kind of strike a balance between the two extremes and offer several advantages. One is that a medium fidelity prototype provides a level of detail that allows users to interact with the app in a more realistic manner. Now, although it's not as polished, say, as a high fidelity prototype, they still convey the essential functionalities, the interactions, and the flow of the final product. And this realism is critical for obtaining accurate user feedback. Then there's the matter of cost efficiency. Developing high fidelity prototypes can be time consuming and expensive. Medium fidelity prototypes offer a cost effective compromise, allowing developers to create a representation model without investing like excessive resources. Now, this is especially valuable in the early stages of development when changes might be a little bit more frequent. And then medium fidelity prototypes are more flexible and easily adaptable to different changes. As feedback is gathered, say during user testing, developers can make iterations and adjustments to the prototype rather quickly. And this iterative process is essential for refining the user experience and addressing any issues that might arise. And then in the user testing phase, the primary focus is going to often be on evaluating the functionality and the usability of the app. So, medium fidelity prototypes enable users to concentrate on essential features and interactions without being distracted by intricate design details. And this helps in identifying and resolving functional issues early in the development process. And then also medium fidelity prototypes, they strike a balance between providing enough detail for realistic interaction and then avoiding that unnecessary distraction that I talked about. They also allow users to grasp the core concepts of an app without getting bogged down by design elements that, say, might change later on in other iterations. Now, user testing provides valuable insight into users' experience, their pain points, and their behavior. And this allows developers to refine and optimize the app. Now, this iterative process helps uncover usability issues early on, leading to more user-friendly and a satisfied mobile app experience. Now, ultimately, user testing is instrumental in ensuring that the final product aligns with user expectations and enhances overall satisfaction. These are a few of the user testing methods. So one is the usability testing. This is where users perform tasks on the app to identify like usability issues, providing insight into navigation, efficiency, and overall user experience. Then there's beta testing, and this is where real users will test a pre-release version of the app in a live environment. And this uncovers like any kind of bugs or glitches or gathers feedback on performance and functionality. Now, A and B testing, this is where we have multiple versions of an app and they're compared by dividing users into groups, helping identify like which version performs better in terms of user engagement, conversions, and other predefined metrics. Then there's surveys and questionnaires where users provide feedback through like structured questions, allowing developers to gather quantitative and qualitative data on preferences, satisfaction, and overall user experience. And then there's eye tracking, and this is where users' eye movements are tracked to understand visual attention and engagement within the app. And this provides insight into like the design effectiveness and content prioritization. Now, the iterative design process is a method of designing and refining a product or a system through a series of repeated cycles. So it involves creating a prototype, testing it, gathering feedback, and then using that feedback to make improvements. Now, this cycle is repeated until the product meets the desired specifications and users' expectations. So, this process involves one, identifying the required goals, that is, defining the problem and setting like the clear objectives for the design, understanding the user's names, constraints, and expectations. Now, if you are performing your user testing as part of maybe a second round, because maybe you tested initially with your low fidelity, this part would have already been done. And then, of course, the generating concepts where you brainstorm and create multiple design concepts, and then consider various approaches to solving problems. This part probably is already done as well. So then the next process within this iterative design phase is building the medium fidelity prototype based on what you've learned from maybe your previous testing. And this is developing a tangible representation of the design. Again, if this is your second round of testing, this may be more of a digital simulation or maybe more physical models. And then there's testing and evaluating. So we're gathering feedback through testing of that prototype and then evaluating the design against the identified requirements. Then the next part of the process is gathering that user feedback. So of course, collecting input from users about their experience with the prototype so that we can understand how well the design meets their needs and their expectations. And then, of course, that refine and revision step where we're going to use our feedback to identify any kind of weaknesses in any areas of improvement and make any necessary changes to the design or the prototype. And then we just repeat this. We iterate through the design process, creating new prototypes and gathering feedback. And we continue refining until, again, the design meets the desired criteria. Now, as it relates to the iterative design process, a strong emphasis on gathering and incorporating user feedback is a powerful approach to creating an app that truly meets the needs of its intended users. And this will foster continuous improvement, adaptability, and a user-centered design philosophy. Now, usability testing, it doesn't have to be expensive. So let's talk about some budget-friendly ways to do usability. One is to start with a small sample of users. So, testing with a small group of users, maybe 5 to 6, can provide valuable insight into your app's improvement. And then continuously iterate and test with different groups to identify reoccurring issues. Another way is to email your network for feedback. So utilize your existing email list to gather beta testers and then make use of what you already have done or already have basically at your disposal. And then you might want to ditch the fancy equipment. Expensive testing labs are really not necessary. Encourage testers to use the app in their own natural environment. And then conducting quick tests using Listna, formerly called Usability Hub, for cost-effective testing of designs, navigation systems, and screen flows. It's free for small teams. And it provides like different ways of, or different types of tests, I should say, such as like maybe the 5-second test, click tests, question tests, nav flow, performance testing, things like that. And then there is the opportunity to maybe use your friends, your family, your coworkers, and maybe other random participants. You want to leverage personal and professional connections for beta testing. Consider testing in public spaces by offering incentives like free coffee to gather authentic and diverse user feedback. And then try a usability testing app. Explore usability testing apps that record like screen flow, or user interactions, or maybe even facial expressions. Options like UX Recorder and usertesting.com, they offer various features for recording and analyzing user experience. So how do we perform user testing for our app? Well, step one is to define your goals. Clearly define the goals of your user testing. Focus on specific issues or aspects of the app's usability. And then tailor your goals based on the app's development cycle, or life cycle, such as like discovery or exploration and user research, in early stages. And then validate your user's experience during the development. What life cycles are you in? And then, set the goals based on that. So step two is determining the testing method. So you want to choose the testing method based on preferences and project needs. Is it in person, moderated? Is it in person unmoderated? Is it remote moderated, or is it remote unmoderated? Understand the pros and cons of each method, and then considering factors like deep insight into moderated sessions and the natural environment in maybe unmoderated sessions, remote sessions. Then the next step is selecting your participants. So you want to recruit real users for testing. Consider demographics and behavioral targeting. Aim for like 5 to 7 participants as per the Nielsen-Norman Group's recommendation to uncover usability issues effectively. And then use platforms like usertesting.com to maybe find and test participants. And then step 4 is preparing the testing material and testing environment. So, create testing objectives based on defined goals, forming sort of a testing script. Okay, set up a realistic scenario for your testers, preparing follow-up and debriefing questions. And if it's in-person testing, organize the testing environment. And if using a platform like lookback.io or maybe usertesting.com, finalize testing arrangements. Step 5 is run the test. Conduct the user testing session and ensure participants think out loud during the test. Each end each test with a debriefing and say follow-up questions, even for remote and unmoderated sessions. And then step 6 is to analyze and adjust. You want to analyze the results of your user testing, identifying like those common problems, what are those friction points? And then, gather as far as like that participants' feedback, analyze their feedback. And then you want to consider measurable data such as the time that was taken to complete the task. That's going to supplement your qualitative feedback. And then develop an action plan with the team to improve the app's UI and UX based on any of the findings. So here are a few tips and best practices for app usability testing. One is to record all your tests for future reference. Make sure you let your users know or your testers know that you are going to be recording. And then, of course, ask their permission. And then you want to provide specific instructions to your participants. so that they know what to expect. Ask mobile users about their expectations. Okay. Keep tasks simple, avoid like any kind of technical terms and things like that. Acknowledge room for improvement in the UX design. Ensure that your moderators remain neutral and say as little as possible. And then test on multiple platforms. You want to test on iOS as well as Android. And then note visual cues and maybe your participants' reactions. Then you want to continue user testing, say for maybe different goals in an ongoing process. And then last, use real money for tasks involving transactions to simulate real world user behavior. Incorporating user testing seamlessly into your prototyping process is going to be crucial for developing successful mobile apps. So you want to start early with user involvement. This means begin involving the users in the research and the planning phase before you even start prototyping. And this is especially important if you're building on maybe an existing asset or providing an alternative to maybe current functionalities. Use remote user testing, market research, and task assignments to understand how users interact with their current asset and then gather insight into their preferences and their behaviors. The next thing is to coordinate between the teams. So you want to facilitate close coordination between mobile app design, development, and market research teams throughout the product's life cycle. The collective insight is going to help shape a better understanding of the user's needs and their preferences. Next, you want to integrate user feedback at every phase. Structure your mobile app design process to involve user feedback at each stage of the project. Seek impressions on design and layout concepts, making it a regular part of your workflow rather than a one-time event. And then use feedback to make informed decisions on design choices, layout options, and overall user experience. Then you want to utilize prototyping tools. So you want to leverage modern mobile app prototyping tools in order to create sophisticated mockups. And these tools allow for visualization of the app at various levels, from basic wireframes to fully functional prototypes. And then experiment with different design visions and user interactions. Prototyping tools help us to iterate through multiple concepts without really committing to a design too early in the process. Then you want to conduct user testing across platforms. So ensure that user testing is conducted across all relative or relevant platforms, as the user experience might vary depending on the device and the operating system. So use the prototyping tools to simulate the app on, say, different devices, and then gather feedback on the user's experience from those various perspectives. And then you want to implement structured user testing. So as you move into the prototyping phase, this is going to help you gather valuable information. Test the app in real world conditions, such as while users are multitasking or maybe walking around, to ensure its intuitiveness in diverse scenarios. Like if you've ever worked with some of those like grocery store apps, it's kind of hard to kind of, work with those, add things to your rewards, look up coupons, things like that when you're trying to grocery shop. So, maybe if it's that kind of app, then take your testers to a grocery store and have them test the prototype using the prototype, while they're actually shopping. And then another thing is you want to include users of different age groups, different backgrounds and abilities, to address a wide range of concerns and ensure accessibility features are effective. Then you want to, of course, evaluate and what we've been talking about, iterate. You want to continuously evaluate the effectiveness of your user testing process. You want to ask questions such as, do you have the right tools for testing? Is user testing fitting seamlessly into your workflow? Is user testing leading to a better app? And then last, you want to implement changes based on your user feedback. Analyze the data collected from user testing thoroughly, and then implement any changes based on user feedback to improve the app's usability, eliminate any glitches, and enhance the overall user experience. User testing shouldn't be just, say, a checkbox activity. Invest time in analyzing the data and deriving meaningful insight. Implement changes based on this analysis to ensure that the testing process contributes to the development of a better, more popular app. So the next thing I want to do is I want to actually walk you through sort of a user testing exercise. Um, and so in this activity, what we're going to do is we're going to conduct a usability test on the Airbnb Explore page. And the goal is to assess the usability of the site's feature and understand how easy maybe the users can navigate or filter or interact with their listings or with the different listings. So what I want you to do is, hopefully you're watching this lecture on your computer. I'd like for you to use your phone for this, okay? And so that you can actually go through the testing and just kind of understand how you would go about doing user testing. So I'm going to give you like different tasks to do, and then afterwards, for each of the tasks, I want you to think about, maybe how easy it was to complete the task. Maybe think about like maybe some design clarity suggestions that you would make as a tester or maybe even as a developer, and then different challenges that you may have encountered. So what I want you to do to start this is within your phone, I want you to go open your mobile browser, and I want you to go to the Airbnb website, and I've given you the website link here. And feel free to pause this lecture, so that you can be able to, you know, complete each of the steps of the task. Now, when you get to the Airbnb website, you're going to be prompted to enter dates and maybe a number of guests. So I want you to just select any date, and then I want you to set the number of guests to one adult, and we'll do this for simplicity. And then I want you to familiarize yourself briefly with the layout of the Explore page. And I want you to notice the main navigation options, the search bar, and the filter options. And then I want you to begin the different tasks that I'm going to outline for you, focusing on completing each as an average user would. Now, again, I want you to complete each task as if you were searching for a real stay, and then I want you to record your observations after each task, noting aspects that were maybe easy, confusing, or things that may have taken more time than expected. Okay, so your first task is going to be to find a stay within a budget. So I want you to search for rental properties in Paris. Okay, next, and again, pause this if you need to. Next, I want you to set a filter for a maximum price of $150 per night. Then I want you to review the listings shown and select one that maybe you find appealing. Now, I want you to record your observations. Was the price filter easy to locate and adjust? Did the filtered results match the budgeted criteria? And were you able to find a property quickly? Or did it take time, to adjust the different settings? All right, let's move on. Now, task 2. I want you to choose one property from the search result. And then I want you to review the property's photos, their amenities, the location on the map, and the different customer reviews. Now, once you've done that, I want you to record your observations. Was it all necessary information, or was all the necessary information easy to find? How was the experience of viewing photos, amenities, and location? And was any information difficult to locate, or did you feel anything was missing from it? Okay. Now, after you record that, we're going to go on to the task 3. Now, in the same location, I want you to find 2 properties that you would consider staying at. Then I want you to compare their price, their ratings, and their amenities. And then last, decide which property you would choose based on this information. Now, I want you to record some observations. So for instance, how easy was it to move between listings to compare them? Were key comparison details like price, rating, amenities, was it easily accessible? And that you feel confident in making a choice based on the available information. Okay, now after you record those observations, let's move on to the last step. So for task 4, we're going to set filters for specific types of stay. So first thing, I want you to search for properties in San Francisco. Then I want you to set filters to find an entire home rental that is pet friendly and has at least 2 bedrooms. Last, I want you to view the results to confirm that they meet your criteria. So some of the observations I want you to record or think about was the setting multiple filters, entire home, pet friendly, 2 bedrooms, was it intuitive? And did the results match your criteria? And then I want you to think about, were there any challenges in locating and adjusting these filters? Okay, so now that you've completed all of the different tasks and you've made note of your observations, let's move on to the last step. Okay, so in this last step, I want you to reflect on different questions. Okay, this is going to be our post-task reflections. So, 1, what was the easiest feature to use on the Airbnb Explore page? And think about why. Okay. What was the most challenging feature to use, and what improvements would you suggest? And then last, overall, how would you rate the mobile browsing experience on a scale from 1 to 5? 1 being very difficult and 5 being very easy. And then I want you to think about the reason why you're rating it like this. So that's how I would conduct as far as a user test. I'd go through the motions, have my goals, go through the different steps that they need to do, observe as far as what they're doing, and some of what, like maybe challenges that they've encountered, some of the things that either was it easy, was it user friendly, so on and so forth. Okay. All right. So that's it for this lecture. Happy testing.